Her shoes were on the kitchen counter, not by the door, not kicked off in the hallway. On the counter, next to the fruit bowl. That's the first thing I saw when I came downstairs at 5:42 a.m. this morning. I know the exact time because I was clutching my coffee mug and wondering why the house smelled faintly like hotel soap. She never leaves her shoes there. She's the one who yells at me if I even think about setting my toolbox near the sink. So, yeah, that tiny detail was the first domino to fall in my brain. Then I noticed the jacket, draped over a chair, damp sleeves, like she'd been caught in the rain. Only, it didn't rain last night. I wish I could tell you I went upstairs and calmly asked her about it. Instead, I just stood there like an idiot, staring at those shoes, trying to come up with an innocent reason they were in the same spot where we keep bananas. That's when she walked in. Same clothes as yesterday, hair tied up like she didn't bother brushing it. And before I could even ask, she said, "Lowell, it was just a meaningless mistake. One night. One stupid night. Please, don't do this right now." No build-up. No easing into it. She just confessed? Or maybe it wasn't a confession. Maybe it was a warning. My chest felt tight, and I think I actually laughed a little, the way you do when something is so absurd you can't believe you're living it. She poured herself coffee like we weren't in some bizarre Twilight Zone version of our marriage, then walked past me to go upstairs. And I just stood there, shoes on the counter, coffee getting cold, wondering which part of my life had just cracked in half, and how much more was going to fall through before the day was over. I didn't say a word to her for the rest of the morning. Not because I was taking some kind of moral high ground. No, I was just scared. Scared of hearing details that would glue themselves to my brain forever. Instead, I busied myself with making the kids' lunches, pretending not to notice that she avoided eye contact. She kissed them goodbye, mumbled something about having a long day at the office, and was gone before I'd even sat down with my own toast. The quiet after they left was almost worse. Every sound, the ticking clock, the hum of the fridge, felt too loud, like the house itself was taunting me. I tried working from home, but my hands kept hovering over my phone. I told myself I wasn't going to snoop. That's not who I am. But when you've just heard your wife say it was just a meaningless mistake before the sun's even fully up, well, self-control isn't exactly my strong suit. It happened around 11 a.m. My phone buzzed with a notification from our shared tablet, the one we keep in the kitchen for recipes and the kids' cartoons. A new message had popped up, synced from her account. The name wasn't saved, just a number, but I didn't have to guess long. The text read, "Are you okay? Haven't stopped thinking about last night." My first thought was that it was some twisted coincidence. Maybe it was work-related. Maybe last night meant a project deadline. I was reaching for any lifeline that would keep me from falling. But then, before I could even think, another message came in. "I know you said it can't happen again, but I can't stop replaying it." I swear my ears were ringing. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. This wasn't just confirmation. This was proof that she'd already had the "we can't do this again" conversation with whoever this was. Which meant it wasn't just one night. It was at least two. For a moment, I thought about driving straight to her office. Barging in, making a scene, demanding answers. But then another, colder thought settled in. What if the person on the other end of those texts wasn't some stranger? What if they were someone I actually knew? The idea crawled under my skin and stayed there. I closed the tablet and sat in the kitchen, staring at the shoes she'd left on the counter, still exactly where they'd been that morning. It felt like they were mocking me, like they knew the whole story and were just waiting for me to figure it out. By the time the kids came home from school, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her tonight. I was going to wait, watch, and see if I could catch a glimpse of this mistake myself. Because if I was going to hear the truth, I wanted it to be undeniable, the kind you can't smooth over with a tearful apology and a line about not destroying the family. The thing about deciding to wait and watch is that you realize just how bad you are at pretending everything's fine. I'm not exactly a smooth operator. My wife's always said I have the subtlety of a marching band, so I spent the next couple of days overcompensating, smiling too much, asking too many questions about her day, offering to do the dishes when I never do. If she noticed, she didn't let on. In fact, she seemed almost lighter, happier, like confessing, if you can even call it that, had taken some weight off her shoulders. Meanwhile, the weight on mine was crushing. Wednesday afternoon, I had my chance. I told her I had a late conference call, which wasn't a complete lie. I did have work, but I also forgot to mention I'd be doing it from the cafe across the street from her office. The cafe had these big front windows that gave a perfect view of the building's entrance. My plan was simple: sit with my laptop, sip coffee, and see if anyone suspicious walked her to her car. It felt ridiculous, like I was in some low-budget spy movie, but I needed to know. An hour in, nothing. Just her coworkers, laughing as they came and went. Then at 5:17 p.m., she walked out. Not alone. The man beside her was maybe mid-30s, tall, wearing a navy peacoat. They weren't holding hands, but their body language was wrong. Too close, too casual in a way that screamed familiarity. She said something. He laughed, and then she reached out and brushed something off his shoulder. A nothing gesture to anyone else, but my stomach flipped. You don't touch someone like that unless there's history. I told myself maybe he was a coworker. Maybe they were heading to their cars parked in the same direction. Then they stopped on the sidewalk. He leaned in, said something in her ear, and she smiled in that soft, private way she used to smile at me. Then, and this is the part that felt like a knife, she stepped forward and hugged him. Not a quick, polite hug. A slow one, the kind where you both hold on just a second too long. I couldn't see his face clearly from where I was, but there was something familiar about the way he stood. I racked my brain, trying to place it, and then it hit me like a punch. I'd seen that coat before. Not on the street, not in a store, in my own living room. 2 months ago. Back then, Felicity had hosted a small work gathering at our house. Most of the people were strangers to me, but one guy, tall, dark hair, that exact peacoat, had spent nearly an hour chatting with her in the kitchen while I played host in the living room. I remember thinking they seemed unusually comfortable for coworkers meeting at a social event. At the time, I brushed it off as me being paranoid. Now, sitting in that cafe, watching her disappear down the block with him, I realized this wasn't one night. This wasn't even close. And if I was right about who he was, then not only had he been in my home, he'd probably been making plans with her while I was refilling the chip bowl. I didn't follow them, partly because I didn't want to cause a scene, but mostly because I was afraid of what else I might see. I just sat there, hands clenched around my coffee cup, wondering how long I'd been playing the fool, and what else she thought she could get away with telling me was meaningless. I didn't sleep that night, not even a little. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathe next to me like she didn't have a care in the world. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her on that sidewalk again, leaning in toward him, smiling like they had their own language. My mind kept circling the same questions. How long? How often? And most of all, why? I kept thinking about that night 2 months ago, when the man in the peacoat stood in my kitchen holding a beer, laughing with her over some inside joke I wasn't invited into. Back then, I told myself I was imagining things. Now, I felt like an idiot for not trusting my gut. By the time the sun came up, I'd made up my mind to figure out exactly who he was. I knew I'd seen him before, but I didn't know his name. Felicity is good at keeping her personal and work lives separate, at least when it comes to what she shares with me. But I remembered something. That work gathering at our house, she'd asked me to take a group photo for her phone. She'd even handed me her phone unlocked. If she still had that photo, and if he was in it, maybe I could match a face to a name. When she went upstairs to shower, I accidentally left my coffee on the kitchen counter and doubled back. Her phone was charging by the toaster. I told myself I wasn't snooping, I was investigating. I found the photo quickly. There she was, standing with 4 co-workers in the kitchen, and there he was, peacoat draped over a chair, holding a drink. My heart pounded as I tapped the image details, praying she'd tagged or labeled someone. No such luck. I went a step further. I copied the photo to my own phone, uploaded it to a social media search. It took all of 2 minutes to find him, because of course, his profile was public. His name was Ethan Wade, and right there in his bio, staring me in the face like a cruel joke, was something that made my stomach twist. He wasn't just a coworker. He was listed as family friend since 2016. Family friend. That meant he'd been around longer than I realized. I clicked deeper into his profile, scrolling past vacation shots and smiling selfies, until I landed on a photo that stopped me cold. A barbecue in our own backyard, for years ago. There was Ethan, flipping burgers at my grill, Felicity beside him holding a plate, looking at him like he was the most interesting person in the world. I was in the background, laughing with someone else, completely oblivious. It hit me all at once. He hadn't just been in my home once. He'd been in my home dozens of times. Holidays, parties, afternoons where I was probably upstairs putting the kids down for a nap while they sat outside talking. This wasn't some chance fling with a stranger she met at a bar. This was calculated, built over years. And the worst part? The kids know him. They've called him Uncle Ethan. When Felicity came back into the kitchen, dressed for work and tying her hair back, she glanced at me and said, "You look tired. Everything okay?" I managed to nod, swallowing down the urge to throw her phone across the room. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I kept my mouth shut. Because now I knew something I hadn't yesterday. This wasn't just about betrayal. This was about someone being close enough to dismantle my family from the inside out. Once you realize the man your wife's been seeing is someone your kids hug on holidays, it changes how you move through your own home. I started feeling like a guest in my own life, like the walls themselves were hiding secrets. Every conversation with Felicity became a balancing act. I had to pretend I was clueless while my head was buzzing with everything I'd pieced together. But I couldn't keep just waiting. I needed proof. Not for a courtroom, not even for friends, but for myself. I needed something I could hold in my hands that would make me stop second-guessing my instincts. So I started tracking them. Not in some high-tech, movie-style way, just careful observation. I paid attention to the little things. The way she suddenly had to stay late twice in the same week. How she'd step into the backyard to take certain calls. The new perfume she claimed was a gift from Mia, even though I'd overheard her tell our daughter she bought it herself. Every piece felt small, but together they formed a picture that was getting harder to ignore. Last Friday was when it almost happened, the moment I nearly caught them together. I told Felicity I was meeting a friend for dinner across town, but in reality, I parked 2 blocks from her office around the time she usually left. I sat in my car, engine off, hood pulled low, feeling like an idiot and a genius all at once. For half an hour, nothing. Just the usual office exodus. People scrolling their phones, rushing for buses, juggling coffee cups and tote bags. Then she appeared, coat buttoned, bag slung over her shoulder. She glanced around, and for a second I thought maybe she'd spotted me. But no, her gaze was searching for someone else. And then there he was. Ethan. Same pea coat, same confident stride, like he owned the pavement. He didn't touch her. Not here, not in front of the building. But there was a familiarity in the way they stood together, like 2 people picking up a conversation they'd been having all day. They started walking, and my pulse kicked into overdrive. I followed, keeping far enough back that I could duck into a shop doorway if they turned around. It felt ridiculous, dangerous, exhilarating, all of it at once. They made it 2 streets over before stopping outside a small Italian restaurant. That's when I froze. Sitting at one of the corner tables, visible through the big front window, was someone I recognized, someone who should never be in the same room as both of them. It was her sister, Mariah, the one who always swore she'd take my side if Felicity ever screwed up. She was already seated, glass of wine in hand, smiling as they approached. Felicity bent down to hug her. Ethan shook her hand. And then all 3 of them sat like this was perfectly normal. I stood there, rooted to the spot, staring through the glass like an outsider watching my own life being rewritten in real time. I wanted to burst in and demand an explanation, but I didn't. My legs wouldn't move. My brain was a mess of questions. Why was Mariah there? Did she know? Was she part of this? The betrayal was one thing, but seeing family sitting comfortably with the man who's been in my wife's bed, that was something else entirely. That was war. I didn't sleep that night either. The image of the 3 of them sitting there in that restaurant burned into my brain. It wasn't just the betrayal anymore. It was the fact that Mariah, who had sat on our couch so many times drinking coffee and listening to me vent about life, was smiling like she was meeting an old friend. I kept replaying it. Felicity leaning in to talk to her sister, Ethan laughing at something Mariah said, wine glasses clinking. Not a hint of tension, not even a flicker of guilt. If I hadn't been outside watching it with my own eyes, I would have sworn it was a harmless dinner. But my gut knew better. By the next morning, I convinced myself I had to talk to Mariah before I confronted Felicity. If there was even a shred of loyalty left in her, she'd tell me the truth. I waited until Felicity left for work and the kids were at school, then called Mariah. She sounded surprised to hear from me. and even more surprised when I asked if we could meet, just the two of us. She hesitated, said she had errands, but eventually agreed to grab coffee at a small place on the edge of town. When I walked in, she was already there, scrolling her phone, her expression neutral. I didn't waste time with small talk. I sat down, leaned forward, and asked, "Why were you at dinner with Felicity and Ethan last night?" Her eyes flicked up at me, calm in a way that made my skin crawl. "What do you want me to say, Lowell?" she replied, voice low. "I know about them. I've known for a while." It was like the air got sucked out of the room. I felt my fingers tighten around the edge of the table. "A while? How long is a while?" She glanced toward the window, avoiding my eyes. "Over a year. Maybe more." I told her it was a bad idea. But she's my sister. I can't control her. I wanted to shout, to ask how she could sit across from me during holidays and birthdays, knowing all this, and say nothing. But before I could, she kept talking. "Look, Lowell, it's not just some fling. I think she's serious about him. They've talked about a future." A future. The word hit harder than anything else. This wasn't a one-time mistake, or even a casual affair. She was building something with him. Something that might not include me at all. My coffee sat untouched as I tried to process the idea that my wife was already imagining a life beyond our marriage, and her sister had been watching the whole thing like it was some soap opera she couldn't turn off. When I finally found my voice, I asked, "Why tell me now? Why meet me if you're just going to defend her?" Mariah sighed. "Because I think she's planning to tell you soon. And I didn't want you to be blindsided." I almost laughed at that. Blindsided? That ship had sailed. What I felt now wasn't shock. It was a cold, creeping clarity. If Felicity was planning her big reveal, I had to get ahead of it. I had to know exactly what she'd been doing, where she'd been, and who else had been covering for her. Because now, it wasn't just about catching her. It was about making sure I wasn't the last one to know in my own marriage. As we left the cafe, Mariah touched my arm and said quietly, "Just be ready. She's not who you think she is anymore." And for the first time since this started, I believed her. After my meeting with Mariah, I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. If Felicity was really planning to tell me soon, then I needed to get ahead of her. I needed to see the truth with my own eyes before she twisted it into whatever version she thought I could live with. The problem was, I couldn't just randomly follow her. She's sharp, and if she caught me lurking, she'd shut down completely. I had to pick the right day, the right excuse, and make sure she never saw it coming. That chance came the following Thursday. She'd mentioned the week before that she had an off-site client meeting in the city and probably wouldn't be home until late. Normally, I'd take that at face value, but now, armed with what I knew, I heard something else in her tone. The careful, casual way she said it, like she'd rehearsed it. That was my opening. I told her I had to work late too, and that I'd just grab something for dinner on the way home. She didn't ask any questions. I left the house 20 minutes after she did, taking the long route toward the city so I could trail her without being obvious. I caught sight of her car a few blocks from our neighborhood, my pulse kicking into overdrive as I merged a few cars back. She didn't go toward any of the usual client areas she'd mentioned in the past. Instead, she headed toward the industrial district, the one lined with warehouses, loft offices, and small boutique businesses. She parked outside a renovated brick building with tall windows and a discreet sign by the door. I stayed in my car for a few minutes, pretending to scroll my phone, until I saw him, Ethan. He walked out from a side street, not in his usual peacoat but in a dark sweater and jeans, carrying what looked like a shopping bag. He glanced around quickly, then went inside. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel. This wasn't a public coffee shop meeting. This was private. I waited until they'd both been inside for a few minutes, then got out and walked down the block, pretending to look at my phone. Through the big windows, I could see the place was some kind of private event space. Dim lights, art on the walls, a long table set with wine glasses and candles. They were at the far end, leaning close, talking in low voices. Felicity was laughing, touching his arm, her body angled toward him in a way that made it clear I was invisible in her life when she was with him. But then something happened that made my stomach turn. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small wrapped package, and slid it across the table to him. He opened it slowly, smiling as he lifted out what looked like a leather-bound notebook. I couldn't see the details, but I knew the notebook. I'd seen it in our house, in the drawer of our nightstand. It was mine. A gift I'd received years ago and barely used. And now she was giving it to him. The gesture felt worse than a kiss. That notebook had personal notes in the back, little scraps of ideas, lists, things I never meant for anyone to see. And she'd taken it, wrapped it, and handed it to him like it was hers to give. I stood there frozen, heart pounding in my ears, fighting the urge to storm in and snatch it back. I managed to walk away before either of them saw me, but the damage was done. This wasn't just emotional betrayal. She was giving away pieces of me, pieces from inside our home, to a man who'd been circling my life for years. I got back to my car, slammed the door, and sat there gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The timeline of their affair didn't just stretch back months. It might go back to before I even realized Ethan was a fixture in our lives. And the worst part? That leather notebook wasn't just some random gift. Inside one of those pages was something that, if Ethan read it, would change the game entirely, and Felicity knew it. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of Felicity's words or Ethan's smug face, but because of what I remembered was inside that leather notebook. Buried in the back pages was a letter I'd written years ago, one I never gave her. It wasn't romantic. It was a messy, rambling confession about how insecure I felt in our marriage back then, how I was afraid she'd wake up one day and realize she could do better. It was personal, raw, and the last thing I wanted in Ethan's hands. The next morning, I decided I was done playing the passive, clueless husband. I waited until Felicity came into the kitchen, coffee in hand, looking every bit the picture of normalcy. I told her calmly, too calmly, maybe, that I knew where she'd been yesterday, who she was with, and what she'd given him. For the first time in weeks, I saw her drop the act. She set her coffee down, eyes wide, and asked how much I knew. I told her enough. Enough to know this wasn't one night. Enough to know she'd brought Ethan into our home in more ways than one. And enough to know that giving him that notebook was crossing a line she couldn't uncross. I expected denial, anger, maybe even tears. But instead, she just sat there, staring into her mug like she was reading the future in the coffee grounds. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I'm ending it. Today." I didn't believe her at first. But she pulled out her phone right there at the table, typed a message, and showed it to me before sending. This was wrong. It's over. Don't contact me again. No soft goodbyes. No promises to stay friends. Just final. The weeks that followed weren't easy. There were long talks, some shouting, more than a few nights where one of us slept on the couch. But slowly, painfully slowly, we started to peel back the layers of whatever our marriage had turned into. Counseling helped. So did brutal honesty. The kind that made my stomach twist, but left no shadows for lies to hide in. One afternoon, months later, I came home from work to find the leather notebook back in its place in the nightstand. I opened it and found a new page tucked in the back. It wasn't my handwriting. It was hers. Just 3 words. I choose us. It didn't erase what happened. It didn't magically heal the trust overnight. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could build something stronger out of what was left. Not because she deserved a second chance without earning it, but because we both decided the family we had was worth fighting for. And I know some people reading this will think I'm a fool. Maybe I am. But sometimes, the victory isn't in winning the fight. It's in finding a reason to keep fighting together.